They came in complete darkness, without a sound. By the time you heard the soft whoosh in the air, it was already too late. German soldiers called them Nachtwechseln, night witches. They were Soviet women, flying flimsy wooden planes through the dead of night, their engines cut, gliding like ghosts over enemy lines. They dropped their bombs and vanished before anyone could even react. Between 1942 and 1945, these women flew over 30,000 combat missions. This isn't just a story about glory. This is a story about sheer terror, unthinkable courage, and the heavy price of being invisible in a war dominated by men. It all started on October 8, 1941. The voice of Marina Raskova, a famed Soviet aviator, crackled over the radio, "Women of the Soviet Union, your motherland needs you." Within weeks, thousands volunteered. But only the best would be chosen to fly. And only the bravest would survive. Imagine climbing into a plane made of plywood and canvas. You have no parachute, it's considered too heavy. No radio, too expensive. No machine guns for defense. They just slow you down. Your only weapon is the darkness. Your only defense is silence. The planes they flew were Polikarpov Po-2 South, old training biplanes from the 1920s. Their top speed was a sluggish 94 miles per hour. They were obsolete before the war even began. But this old clunker had one bizarre advantage. It was too slow for the advanced German fighters. A Messerschmitt trying to match its speed would simply stall and fall out of the sky. The women of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment didn't see this as a tactical edge. They saw it as a death sentence. Nadezhda Popova was just 19 years old when she first climbed into her Po-2. Her own commander looked at her and said, "You'll be dead in a week." She went on to fly 852 missions. She was shot down 3 times, and she survived the war. But 32 of her fellow pilots did not. Their very first combat mission was on June 28, 1942. The target, German artillery positions near the Caucasus. 12 planes took off at 10 p.m. into a pitch-black night, under a thick blanket of clouds. Senior Lieutenant Yevdokia Bershinskaya, just 23 years old but already a veteran pilot, led the formation. But this night was different. This wasn't training, this was real. The technique was simple, but utterly terrifying. Fly up to about 10,000 feet. Then, cut the engine. You glide silently toward the target, guided only by maps and starlight. Drop the bombs. Frantically restart the engine as you begin to fall, and then climb back up to do it all over again. Sounds easy, right? Now try doing it in total darkness, with anti-aircraft fire exploding all around you, and German searchlights desperately trying to lock onto your fragile wooden plane. Yekaterina Ryabova later described it perfectly. "The whooshing noise we made as we glided down sounded like a witch's broomstick. That's why the Germans called us night witches." On that very first night, one plane never returned. Pilot Alexandra Samusieva and her navigator Lyudmila Anyufrieva were shot down. They were both only 20 years old. The war had just begun for the night witches, and death was already keeping score. Here is something that is hard to wrap your head around. These women didn't fly one mission per night. They often flew 8, sometimes 10, sometimes even 12. Each plane could only carry 2 small bombs. To make any real impact, they had to go back again and again and again. Land in a dark field, refuel, reload, take off. All night long. Every single night. No sleep, no rest. Just fly, bomb, return, and fly again. Irina Sabrova flew 1,008 missions during the war. That's more than any other Soviet pilot, male or female. When asked how she did it, she said, "I didn't think about dying. I thought about my navigator. If I died, she died too. So I just couldn't die." That bond between pilot and navigator was sacred. They shared a tiny open cockpit, exposed to freezing winds that could reach -40 degrees. They couldn't hear each other over the engine's roar, so they communicated by tapping on each other's shoulders. 1 tap, turn left. 2 taps, turn right. 3 taps. Drop the bombs. If you missed a signal, you missed the target. Drop too early, you might hit civilians. Drop too late, you'd waste precious ammunition. And if you got hit by flak, you would burn alive in a wooden plane soaked in fuel. On August 1st, 1943, the Germans were ready for them. They had figured out the pattern. They knew the night witches would come, so they set a trap. That night, 15 experienced crews took off. By dawn, only 11 returned. What happened to the other 4 planes? Yevgenia. Jigolenko was flying her 7th mission of the night when she saw the searchlight's 3 beams converging on her tiny plane. She cut the engine and dove, but it was too late. They had her. Anti-aircraft fire erupted all around. Tracer rounds lit up the sky. A shell exploded right behind her plane, and shrapnel ripped through the canvas fuselage. Her navigator, Galina Dakudovich, screamed, "I'm hit! I'm hit!" Yevgenia looked back and saw blood pouring from Galina's leg. But they were still in the air. The plane was somehow still flying. "Hold on!" Yevgenia shouted, restarting the engine and climbing straight up, as fast as the old Po-2 could manage. Bullets whizzed past them, hitting the wing and the tail, but they made it back to base. Galina survived, but her leg had to be amputated. She never flew again. The other 3 planes weren't so lucky. 6 women died that night. Their bodies were never found. Being a female combat pilot in the Soviet Air Force meant more than just fighting the enemy. It meant fighting your own side too. Male pilots mocked them, saying, "Go back to the kitchen," or "War is not for women." Some ground crews would sabotage their planes, forgetting to refuel them. Some commanders refused to give them proper equipment, but the Night Witches proved them all wrong. Mission after mission, night after night. By 1943, the fear they inspired was so great that German command offered an Iron Cross, one of their highest military honors, to any pilot who could shoot down a Night Witch. That's how dangerous these women in their sewing machines, as they called them, had become. But the history books often miss the deeper story. These women weren't just fighting a war. They were fighting for respect, for recognition, for the right to be seen as soldiers. When the war ended, Hero of the Soviet Union medals were awarded to male pilots by the hundreds. How many did the Night Witches receive? Just 23. Out of the hundreds who served and sacrificed. When veterans marched in victory parades, the men marched in front. The women marched in the back, if they were allowed to march at all. Nadezhda Popova said it best: "We fought 2 wars, one against the Germans, and one against our own people who thought we didn't belong." May 4th, 1945. 3 days before Germany surrendered. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment flew its final mission over the retreating German forces near Berlin. By then, the regiment had flown over 23,000 missions and dropped 3,000 tons of bombs. They had destroyed bridges, trains, warehouses, and armored vehicles. And they had lost 32 pilots. When they returned to base that morning, there was no celebration, no cheering. They just sat in silence, staring at the empty spaces where their friends used to sit. Their commander, Yevdokia Bershenskaya, gathered them together. "You are the bravest women I have ever known," she said. "The world will never forget you." But for a long time, she was wrong. The world did forget. For decades, their story was buried. No books, no movies, no monuments, just silence. They were ghosts who flew in the dark and were forgotten in the light. But history has a way of revealing its secrets. In 2009, researchers uncovered German war diaries from 1943. One entry, dated August 1st, read, "The Night Witches hit us again. We shot down 4. But they came back. They always come back. I don't know how to stop them anymore." Another entry from 1944 said, "I would rather face 100 tanks than those women in their wooden planes. At least tanks make noise." In 1995, 50 years after the war, the surviving Night Witches held a reunion in Moscow. Only 11 were still alive. They were in their 70s, frail and gray-haired. A journalist asked them if they had any regrets. Irina Sabrova, the woman who flew over 1,000 missions, looked at him and said, "Only one. I wish the world remembered us the way they remember the men." History is often written by the loud, by those who build their own monuments. But the Night Witches were silent warriors. They flew in darkness, they died in darkness, and they were nearly forgotten in darkness. It's time we finally turn on the light and remember their names. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as incredible as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more hidden histories. We'll see you next time.